My name is Brad Teitel, and I am the Global Policy and Advocacy Lead at the Gates Foundation for our work on AI. And as my colleague Ankur said so eloquently earlier in this session, our focus at the Gates Foundation is on how innovation can be applied to responsibly solve real-world development challenges at scale. So our goals are around, a world free of infectious diseases, ensuring that no mother or child dies from a preventable cause, that hundreds of millions are lifted out of poverty. And we're really interested in this conversation because of the potential for AI tools to dramatically accelerate all of that. Now, AI can strengthen the systems that deliver that impact and public services ranging from healthcare delivery to supporting small scale farming and the institutional infrastructure that underpins that, but it requires systems to deliver it. And the promise of AI is enormous, but beyond the technical we just heard about, AI impact hinges on whether AI tools and those systems are trusted, on whether they're sustainable from an economic perspective, and whether they're deployable in real world contexts. So this conversation is about the mechanics of impact. So how do we know as funders, many of us, what to fund and what is worth sustaining? How is trust built with the communities that ultimately AI is going to be serving for those use cases? And what does it really take to move to durable scale that can actually be sustainably financed and sustained over time? And how do we ensure that AI solutions are built on that digital public infrastructure rail that we've heard about to ensure that they are equitable, efficient, and effective, and able to build on the type of infrastructure that, for example, India has built so well? So to explore these questions, we brought together panelists who sit at different stages of that AI value chain, from research funding in terms of Shiv Kumar, to catalytic philanthropic investment with Eli, and to large-scale public sector delivery with Vijayanti. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn to them. And I'd love to start by really just asking each of you, from where you sit in that AI value chain, let's talk about the challenges. What do you think most often prevents AI or strong AI research or pilots from evolving into scalable systems and that deliver scalable, measurable impact? And I'll actually start at the sort of the downstream end with you, Vijayanti, and ask you to go first.
Thank you so much, Eli, for this wonderful introduction. As evidenced by just the traffic, it took me over an hour. I think the surge in client demand and interest is really taking off quite a lot. And while we see our clients, country clients, really ask us some questions about how we can help and how they can consider and be much more intentional about this journey, I think we're all still learning. So I think we need to be a little bit humble about the approach that we're all taking, which is we're shaping it as we learn and go along. But it's really around three areas. One is the fundamentals still are important, because you can't think about AI without some of the foundational digital infrastructure. And when we think about the importance of last mile broadband connectivity, data infrastructure, some data governance around data classification, data protection, and others, the digital public infrastructure investments. These are all foundational infrastructure that still doesn't exist in a lot of our countries. When we think about the support we're providing in Bangladesh for last mile broadband connectivity, you have less than 10% of fixed broadband. Or the support that we're providing in Sri Lanka, thinking about data classification and different public-private models for data infrastructure and cloud credits. When we think about device affordability, South Asia is the second to Africa in terms of a large usage gap, 50% with large usage gap, with device affordability being one of the key constraints. And we're only hearing from manufacturers that device affordability is going to get worse off than it is better, with the memory costs increasing exponentially. So I think one is just continue to focus on some of those core digital infrastructure needs. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about really thinking a little differently and evolving and trying to see how AI adoption and usage can be supported. And I think that's where we need to think a little bit differently. One is around de-risking and blended finance, and the other is around more pooled financing. So when we think about de-risking and blended finance, This is where a mix of philanthropic funding, concessional funding, together with some of the MDB funding can really take off with AI adoption. So we are starting to do that with AI sandboxes, really helping countries think about, and here in India in a couple of states, but we plan to scale that up across the region for early stage piloting, experimentation, also learning as we go along with evidence and research alongside that. But then as that learning and experimentation, that we then infuse that into some of our projects where we support that can be scaled through our MDB financing. And I think the second and then just the last is on pooled financing. I think India has shown with the AI mission what's capable in terms of cloud compute and being able to think about the pooled demand and then bringing down the costs. We know from experience, whether it's Gavi or other types of models, where you can consider how that type of model of pooled demand and then bringing down and bringing in and leveraging private sector, and think about whether we can do that for GPUs as well.
That's great, thanks. And you mentioned de-risking and the catalytic needs, and turning to our philanthropic funder. Eli, I'd love to hear from you. Like, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks in terms of trying to turn the type of investments you're putting resources into scalable systems?
No, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it, and thank you to ORF and Carnegie and the organizers for having me. So I think we're a strategic philanthropy, and so what Hewlett does is really we tend to invest in ecosystems. And so we look for civil society partners who are trusted by the communities in which they operate, and really have the local knowledge and the built relationships to really work with the community and stakeholders to identify what is the problem they are trying to solve, leveraging AI or a discrete emerging technology, and then work to assess, do they have the technical acumen to then translate that technology to make sure that it's actually being deployed properly to solve whatever that need or use case is. But really it starts with are they from the community? Do they have the trust to actually then try to then work through, is this going to work? Is there going to be uptake? How do we overcome whatever the obstacle is? How do we get buy-in from the local government? Again, there are a range of obstacles that can be faced. But for us, it really starts with assessing and diligencing who is that civil society partner, and do they have all of the attributes and the proven track record to start tackling problems? And then the technology is but one tool to try to achieve that change. And so that's more our approach. I realize other philanthropies start with AI as a solution that should always be at the forefront to whatever problem is being tackled. We view it as one of the many tools in the toolkit of the civil society groups that we support around the world, and a very exciting and novel one, but want to sort of say that we are not, techno-solutionists, right? There are socio-technical challenges, and you always need to think about the socio, and that's where a lot of that diligence comes in to make sure that the civil society organization has the relationships, has all of the wherewithal it needs to solve a hard problem.
And Shiv Kumar, you're a research funder, and ANRS was created to help strengthen the research ecosystem in India. So where are you seeing those bottlenecks and the need to bridge between upstream research and the ability to translate it into durable solutions?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here. See, ANRF has different tools in the toolkit. We fund primary research in just similar to the National Science Foundation in the United States. That's broad-based national research in terms of AI fundamentals. Our line ministries like MIT support large foundation models that are being announced today as part of the India AI mission. And then what we do is we are looking at specific areas to accelerate in what we call a mission mode for research. And there we are picking topics such as AI for science and engineering. That is looking at the AI and the intersection with science and engineering, and I was moderating a panel today morning about that as well. So that's one example. Similarly, we are working with you folks on the Gates Foundation on medical technologies, medtech, which embeds AI as part of it. And then there are other areas. We will be doing programs around drones. We are going to be launching a large program around societal innovation, but looking for leapfrog demonstrators in these areas. So, and of course, we also fund translational research and centers and the like, and broad-based centers at the intersection of humanities, social sciences, and science and technology. So we're taking a multi-pronged approach, but in these accelerator or mission mode programs, we are trying an alignment approach, which is to take all of society and all of government together. The way we are doing our MedTech program is where ANRF co-funds along with ICMR, which is our Council for Medical Research, alongside you folks, to aggregate capital and also aggregate the best of ideas. Similarly, in our AI for science and engineering, we have multiple partners, including several science departments, MIT, and so on the government side, but also many private sector partners. In fact, we are announcing Google, NVIDIA, and Qualcomm as additional partners in this in the AI Summit as well. So we'll be broadening and deepening our connections. So the view again there is the different partnerships help us align on different direction. The partnerships on the government side help us ensure there is policy alignment. The partnerships on the private end side ensures that there is scaling alignment on the private and technical side. And then the rest of society ensures that civil society has the right buy-in as well. Right? So this is the approach we are taking in these techniques.
And I'm actually going to go backwards now from research back up to deployment. Stick with you, Shiv Kumar. I know you may have to step out a little early, but verifiability is really important here, right? We need to make sure that whatever tools we're investing in are proven, including in real world settings, and that the right incentives are there and the right assurances that when governments invest or any investor takes up these tools, that they're doing it with the evidence in mind. So I'd really be interested to hear from you, how do you incentivize sort of the research ecosystem and that translation from research to tools to ensure that it is backed by evidence and that verifiability is there?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I mean, AI is going through a phase where there is different levels of trustworthiness that is being insisted upon as part of the overall trustworthy or responsible AI principles. I think and also there is constant feedback from the user community and the adopter community on what is the level of trustworthiness, what is the level of verifiability that is happening as well. So when we are funding research, I'm not taking too many a priori bets about verifiability. We just ask for scientific validation. We ask for enough field trials for ensuring that it is well grounded. But once it goes to the private sector to translate upwards, we have an RDI fund, which is a 1 lakh crore fund to help drive and scale up that. We expect a lot more scrutiny into that aspect. So when I'm funding things at a much more foundational level, I'm more looking at focusing on the opportunity and being mindful of the risks. But I think the valley of death or the translational portion is where the rubber will meet the road fully about this.
Great. Well, trust and feedback certainly brings us back to you, Eli. And your work, I mean, Hewlett has invested in a whole suite of open reusable AI safety tools. And I'd be really curious to hear from you, what have you sort of learned about investing in trust and the ability to actually build it through investment, through that kind of engagement? But also, how do you think those lessons might translate to those other enablers that are critical here, such as data governance standards or other tools?
So it's hard, right? I mean, getting this to work at scale is a challenge that I think we all face in different ways. So I think a few lessons. I mean, one is there was an earlier conversation, I think, around multi-stakeholderism and sort of who you engage, who has a seat at the table, who do you bring in early to help co-create and to use the tools and to define the parameters is obviously key. And so the more that you learn how to do that and both have enough of a theory of the case that people will know that you're serious and want to engage, but then also can help shape it materially, and striking that balance is obviously one of the most challenging ones. I think as far as, how do you actually build open source tools and things that are then used at scale, finding innovative partnerships with companies who oftentimes have expertise about actually building production quality software and tools, and find a way to actually work creatively to either get some of that data, some of those initial tools, then to sort of open source and make them more broadly applicable and more broadly accessible, democratize them. There are sort of interesting models where I think learning from the past of open source and innovating to push it forward in the sort of for the AI world. And I think one of the challenges that we haven't yet squared yet is sort of what is the business model, for lack of a better term, of how do you sustain some of these open source projects? And the traditional model of sort of open source and sustaining open source software is not exactly what we need for this moment, especially if we want to democratize access, empower communities, and realize that those who are going to contribute and do some of that work, even if it's a passion project, it's a bit extractive if you're not paying people for their time and their effort, right? And so there are lots of trade-offs. And so I don't want to say there aren't really any easy answers, but there are, I think, interesting examples that we're learning from and trying to stitch together into sort of a sustainable, replicable playbook.
Great. And back to you, Vijayanti, with business models and sustainability. So you spoke a bit about blended financing, de-risking, and how we can sort of get from that pilot stage to scale, but we have to keep it at scale. And so I'm curious, in your work at the bank, when you're working with governments to enable the kind of financing that helps them get to scale, but also advise them on how to keep it at scale, where do you see opportunities in the system? And we keep coming back to this interconnectedness between DPI and AI. Are there any sort of lessons there about how we can really use DPI to create efficiencies to keep things going in an economically sustainable way?
I think there's a lot of learning from the past decade of helping countries think about how to approach DPI with open, modular, interoperable, and for public benefit. And there's still a lot of learnings. I don't think we're there yet in terms of applying some of that learning to AI. And I'm looking at some of my friends here in the front who I'm sure can help shape that thinking. I mean, when I see sort of the layer above now DPI, we're talking about open network stacks. And I just saw today, I mean, I know in Maharashtra with the Mahavista and now more broadly, the open network for farmers who are being able to access advisory, but also think about market linkages, creating that layer above DPI, which is also then open, interoperable, and can crowd in private sector. I saw today the similar approach with the power energy trading approach in India as well, which is amazing. I mean, it's really democratizing buyers and sellers to be able to receive and sell power. And it's that empowerment, but it's also, I think what's different is it's a layer that allows public and private to come together in a meaningful way, but in an open and competitive and interoperable way where different companies can come in and out and be swappable in many ways. And so I do hope that we can collectively come together in the same way that many philanthropic institutions, development partners, countries came together a decade ago to really shape the thinking about the approach so that we can see the same mindset when we approach AI use cases.
So I loved how one of the previous panels tried to open it up for questions to the audience. If we have a microphone, I'd love to see if any of you have a question, otherwise I can keep going. Anyone have a question for our panelists? Please.
My name is Madhukar from Co-Develop. I want to go back to the question of what is global cooperation looking like, which is the theme of what you have here. We haven't quite discussed the global cooperation, but I would love to get some thoughts.
Cooperation?
Global cooperation.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious. So what does global cooperation look like? And you obviously all touch it at different levels. So feel free to speak to any of your perspectives, research, philanthropy. We obviously do a lot of work as philanthropies together, or from the bank's perspective. Who wants?
Yeah, from the ANRF perspective, we are partnering with non-governmental partners a lot more than governmental partners. So including the Gates Foundation, we have the Wadhwani Foundation represented here, and many others we are exploring partnerships with. And I mentioned many multinational companies that we are partnering with. So that's been the focus of my strategy personally on the short run. But my colleagues in the Department of Science and Technology or other DBT, et cetera, they do government-to-government partnerships, and we coordinate on bridges between these. So together, we provide a single face and overall global partnership. So I'm quite pleased at the the set of partnerships we have put forward, and we would certainly welcome a lot more partners to work with us as we go forward. So we're very open.
Please.
So I'm I think there's many ways of cooperation when I think about research. So we are also engaging in more impact evaluations and early evidence as we do some of these pilots and sandboxes and partnering with various academic institutions. I know JPALS also has a large cohort of partners thinking about research. So I think that's one we certainly should come together. The other is on thinking about de-risking, what organizations can come in with concessional grant funding, thinking about early experimentation and piloting. And I think, one of the things that I heard Pramod say yesterday, which is it's not just taking the pilots and then seeing how it can scale, but also thinking about how we can build with scale in mind and how we can come together, as I mentioned, in that respect. And then I think similar, like pooled funding around what I mentioned, aggregating demand. And it's not even just the Gavi model, but it's also even scaling solar in the World Bank Group, where we pooled demand and thought about a mix of different instruments, whether it was advisory to governments, then bringing in private sector, but then also stapled finance. And so I think there's a range of public and private actors that can come together. But in the end, I think we need to be humble. I repeat this again over and over again because we all still are learning. And I think if we have that mindset of learning as we go, researching, understanding the evidence, and then being iterative, and I think then we have a lot to achieve.
Eli, please.
No, and I think international cooperation is obviously critical, right? I mean, this summit is one of the many vehicles to channel and accelerate that cooperation. And on the funding front, if you think about the summit last year in Paris, Current AI was one of the largest outcomes, which is a very innovative donor collaborative that involves governments, the private sector, civil society, to try to build, all sorts of infrastructure and resources to benefit society to leverage the positive power of AI. So I think this is going to be a very interesting year for international cooperation on AI more broadly, given the range of really important events and global convenings that are happening. And so I think, we are one of the many funders just eager to continue to find new channels for cooperation, to find opportunities to co-fund, to seek out pilots that we can collectively work on, to de-risk all of the things that my fellow panelists have mentioned.
I think we have time for one more, if anyone else from the audience wants to ask a question. All right, I'm happy to go. So a little bit of a lightning round. Feel free to keep these short, and if we have time, I'll throw out a couple more. But sort of what's your one big idea? Like if you could snap your fingers in your work, and whether it's create the pooled fund, not to steal your big idea, or de-risk something, like if you could make that thing happen that would help in your work move from the pilots you're looking at to something scalable, what would it be? And I'll just go down the line this way.
I'm just going to repeat myself. I think it's really a paradigm shift of building with scale in mind.
Yeah, I would say collaboration for impact, whether it's collaboration at the capital side or collaboration on the execution side. I think that would be the key, and that's our North Star.
I think we slightly need a third way or a different approach on how we think about philanthropic funding on AI, given that there are a couple dominant viewpoints that are somewhat tribalized, if you will. And I think trying to find an approach that can weave together different views and articulate a bit more of a shared agenda instead of somewhat divergent areas of focus. And that may be a little philanthropic in the weeds, but I think that type of strategy and more aligned approach across a wide array of philanthropic funders would be quite transformative.
All right, we have a little time, so here's one more. What would be one piece of advice you would give governments to say, if you want to make this work, this is the best thing or the one thing I would advise you to do first? Well, we can go the other direction.
Okay, so I think show curiosity and sort of be humble, right? I mean, it's always hard with novel technologies to fully understand them and to keep pace with them. And I think that government in a democracy is the representative of our citizens here in the United States, wherever the case may be, just really being open to learning and really to push the envelope. We've had some great government officials across the summit speaking, and I think they are a testament to how that is becoming more of the norm as opposed to the exception. But I think continuing to do that is one thing I would encourage.
Shivkumar?
Oh, I'm come from the private sector to the government. I think one of the key things I'm trying to do is to do few things, but do them really well, as opposed to trying to do many things and doing them badly. That's my key takeaway.
It's good advice for life. Please, Jante.
While thinking about all the possibilities and the excitement and energy around AI, don't forget about some of the fundamentals that are still required to make AI really achieve those, and put people at the center. I think continue to see how the new technology can really improve people's lives with human-centered design.
I think that's a great note to end on, because I think all of us agree that everything we're trying to do on AI is ultimately about impact and sustainable impact, and that takes work. So thank you all, and appreciate it.